Ladies and gentlemen, we have got another stop in our visiting trip around the great city of Conroe, Texas, Montgomery County, looking for people that are in business, small business, entrepreneurs, startups, folks that have been at it for a while. And today we're blessed to stop by and visit with Lisa. Lisa, how are you this morning?
I'm very well. Thank you, Rick.
Well, we've got a beautiful day, the start of fall. Lisa Smith, by explanation to our listeners, is a private investigator licensed by the state of Texas. And if you check into that law by chance, you'll find that it covers a lot of different professions, broad category of private investigators. So Lisa works primarily with forensic investigations. And that is can be a very, very helpful thing for most businesses. So Lisa, why don't you give us some background of what brought you to open your company, Dragon Investigation Group?
Okay. Well, I've had a couple of careers before I got into private investigation. My last career was going away, being outsourced, going overseas, going digital. So I decided to go back to school to pursue a long-held interest in criminal justice. I did not know how I was going to translate that degree into any kind of career. I was too old to be to work for the government, didn't want to be a police officer, but a local private investigator group came and gave a talk at the college. And I thought, yeah, I think I can do that. So I mentored with them for about a year and then opened up my own business and have been building and growing and learning ever since.
Well, you know, your background, like many of us, we open a business, our first business at some point, and all that experience comes to way. You have got, I just have to say, a tremendous background. As a computer programmer, you've worked in the medical field, as you mentioned, your schooling, criminal justice. That makes you, to me, profile out as potentially a great investigator. Well, let's talk about specifically what you do. I mean, you're a forensic investigator. Tell us what that's all about.
Well, it's not really forensic, isn't really the right word.
Okay.
I'm a certified fraud examiner.
Okay.
So in the course of my growing and learning as a private investigator, I discovered that I didn't really enjoy the typical private investigator duties, the surveillance and the interviews, jailhouse interviews and things like that. So I got extra training as a certified fraud examiner through the ACFE, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, which are based out of Austin, Texas. And what that entails is allows me to focus more on white collar crime and fraud in the small businesses and things like that. And I bring all of the private investigator skills to bear on doing fraud examinations. So,
well, you know, that obviously is, unfortunately, it seems to be a booming field, meaning I call it politely white collar crime. You've also got a background. I didn't want to skip over it because you and I have talked about this prior to the interview. You've got a background in genealogy, which to me brings even another skill set to what you do. Talk about that a little bit.
So yeah, genealogy has been a hobby of mine ever since my teens. And once I came into the PI world and realized that, you know, all of the skills and the things that I was doing for genealogy work really applied. They were the same as the private investigator. They were, you know, you're putting pieces of a puzzle together. You have to document each step. You have to write an end result or end report, you know, or a resultant report and things like that. So I just started to incorporate that into my business as another service area. I'm also the president of a local genealogical society down in Clear Lake, the Bay Area Genealogical Society. I'll make a plug for their name. And we spend our efforts on educating people on how to do genealogy research and the skills and the techniques and things like that. I've had several successful cases where I matched DNA adoptees and their birth relatives through DNA matching. So it's all relative. It's all the same investigations, putting pieces of the puzzle together and that sort of thing. So I really enjoy doing that kind of work.
Yeah, it's amazing because, like you say, genealogy is somewhat similar in a broad sense, at least, of the kind of, fraud investigation work you do and checking and trying to uncover that type of work. Now, when you do a fraud investigation, do you work with other professions like accounting and those kind of people in your cases?
Yes, I can. It depends on the situation, depends on the business and things like that. We usually start with a fraud risk assessment, which is sitting down with the key players in a company and going over their business processes and looking for the controls that they have in place to prevent fraud, kind of giving them an idea of where there are gaps in those controls, how to fix those gaps, and move forward to protecting their business. And then if we were to find something along the way, and we would go into an investigation, I kind of flip over into my PI mode and, document things along that way. And if I need help with certain things, I will talk to, say, the accounting department, or I'll talk to, I have resources, colleagues that I work with where, an attorney who might advise me to do something this way rather than that way so that the company and my client is protected. So, yeah.
When it comes to smaller businesses, owner operated businesses, maybe have 5, 10, 20 employees, what can you do for those size businesses as far as the services you provide?
Well, that is where my passion lies, is in helping small businesses. So small businesses, as you mentioned before, fraud is just rampant, and it's around the globe. And small businesses, those with 1,000 or less employees, actually account for half of all occupational fraud globally. Those businesses with 100 employees or less account for 1/4 of all occupational fraud, again, globally. So small businesses are really being hit hard by fraud. Unfortunately, a lot of the small business owners they're entrepreneurs. They're busy building their business and focused on growing their business and things like that. And fraud is not even on their radar often. And they have the thought that they know all their employees, they trust their employees, things like that. But the statistics bear out that small businesses are hit hardest, with fraud. So I can do a fraud risk assessment, as I mentioned before. I can come in and hand out a questionnaire to the key players in the company, have them answer those, and then we all sit down in a room, half a day, whole day, whatever it takes, depending on their size of their company and their needs. And we just hash out, what have you got in place right now? Here are the gaps. Here's some suggestions on how to close up those gaps. And then we can go further if the small business owner says, well, I don't know how to write a policy, a fraud policy, or I don't know how to put that particular control in place. I can help them with that as well, and give them suggestions, give them some templates, and then just keep following up with them to make sure that the controls that they have put in place continue to work. Monitoring is a big deal. Once you've got your fraud policy and your controls in place, you want to make sure that you continually monitor to make sure that it's working. So I can help small business owners put all that in place. And
let me ask you, what is the typical situation? And I say maybe there's not a typical, but generally speaking, that a small business finds itself in that would cause you to be brought in to either do preventative services like you mentioned, or to do an investigation. What does a typical scenario look like when someone reaches out to you?
Well, I'm not sure if I can give a typical one because, as you said, nothing is typical. Their businesses are all different, depends on the industry they're in and their structure and things like that. I guess one example I can give is actually I worked with a nonprofit where they were meeting in person. This is before COVID, of course, and they had a registrar, a membership coordinator who would be taking in applications at a desk at meetings, and would take the cash and the checks that new members would sign up and whatnot. And rather than taking that money and handing it over to the treasurer of the organization at the end of that meeting, that night or that day, this person would actually take that chunk of money home. And it would be converted into a personal check. This person would write a personal check and hand it to the treasurer a week, 2 weeks, a month later. The treasurer would then, of course, deposit that check and say membership dues received and whatnot. There was a record of the monies written down by the registrar, as he received the money. But again, this person wrote that information down. There was nobody else around really watching what he wrote down. He took the money home, and who knows where and when, if any money disappeared, if things like that. So this was on an extremely small scale, but this is the sort of thing that can happen where someone just accepts money. There's no oversight. There's nobody to verify that this was the money that was received, and then the taking of the money home and not just immediately passing it on to the treasurer for deposit opens up all kinds of possibilities of theft and things like that. So that's just a small scale sample. And basically I came in and just put in some, placed in some policies, suggested some policies in place where the money gets immediately turned over at the end of the meeting. The logged information is counted right there between the registrar and the treasurer. They at the end of the meeting, they make the time, they get together, the treasurer counts everything that came in, makes sure that it all matches on the log sheet, and then he takes the money home and or to the bank the next day. So that's just a very simple example, but that's one example of how I can help put in a policy or put in a process in place to help prevent any kind of skimming.
Well, that's a wonderful example. Based on my experience in working in retail service business, cash back in the day was well, and checks too, but that is a great example. Hopefully our listeners, if they don't have these processes in place, whether it's cash or credit or whatever, there are schemes and ways to take your money, business owners. So
yes,
let's talk about some of the other services you offer that relate particularly to our small businesses.
Sure. So I do the typical background checks that you hear about for employees and vendors. That's one fraud control that I recommend small businesses have, which is an onboarding process for their vendors in addition to their employees. But vetting your vendors is a great way to control fraud as well. So basic background checks, I get some advanced background checks, things along those lines. I also perform or am educated in doing equivocal death investigations. And that's where there's a question on the cause or manner of death. And a family disagrees with what the coroner has determined as their manner or cause of death. And we can do some investigation into that to try to prove or disprove that result. I do some, I'm very good at locating assets and or witnesses. So for, say, a class action lawsuit, if an attorney is looking for witnesses, I have a process I use that I can try to get them a whole bunch of ex-employees, say, at the company that they're suing, and they might be able to find their silver bullet witness through that. And then finally, I do genealogical research, DNA matching, match up adoptees with birth relatives, create family trees, and research individuals and things like that.
Well, you offer a variety of subjects or services, excuse me. Let's go back to the background checking. One of the biggest things that I learned through, unfortunately, experience in this case was that if I didn't hire someone right in the beginning, then the outcome was almost 100% of the time was going to be bad. And part of that was checking backgrounds. And do you find that is when you get called in and there's been, say, some kind of theft or whatever, it's the background check that was missed or not done? Was there something in the background perhaps that would have, red flag would have popped up?
Yes, that can definitely be the case. Even in large corporations, sometimes a background check gets done and there are red flags in the background check, but the company chooses to ignore them. And the end result is most often not good. So I can, one example I have is I actually worked for a company a long time ago in the HR department, believe it or not, and they did their background checks, but their background checks were just a simple throw in a name. They had a company that would do the background checks. There was a traveling nurse that they did a background check on. And the background check itself didn't say anything of a criminal nature, but what it did show is that this traveling nurse had a history with all the other hospitals across the country. They were let go. And there were reasons why this traveling nurse was let go, but nobody looked at that. And it turned out the traveling nurse was stealing narcotics and that's why they would get caught and they would be let go. But because they were a traveling nurse, they just moved on to the next thing. So that's an example where even a background check gets done, but if it's done by a company who's just, what do I want to say, like a production line, they're just feeding in the names, pulling out some information and sending it along. They're not doing any analysis of that background check. So I do a little bit more, and I do that analysis for you. And I also, there's a level of background check that I can do where I look into the person's social media and news and stories about them, and try to find if there's anything untoward in their background.
Well, I can be a testimonial that what you do, I appreciate the extent you do it, as well as you mentioned, but based on, again, on my number of years in business of hiring people, retail service and other businesses, and it wasn't necessarily that they turned out to be a thief. There were just other things that if we had done a better background check would have shown up. We've, and things that show up in background checks, red flag goes up, and I don't hire them. I would encourage anyone that's in business of hiring anyone other than maybe immediate family that you need to do this. Well, I've been tricked by a referral or two too. I mean, I relied on it too heavy, and referrals are the best source, in my opinion, of new people. Well, let's talk about asset location. That's something you do, where assets, I guess that typically involves some kind of dispute. How do you just quickly kind of walk us through how you locate an asset?
Okay, so I would say, for example, we have a case where people are getting divorced, and they have to split their assets, or whatever, and one party is hiding an asset. Sometimes they hide a boat or something along those lines. So the first thing I would do is I would start with a background check to determine if they have assets, property, cars, watercraft, things like that. There are ways to find out if they have those items. And then you just do a basic tracking of where was the asset last located. And sometimes you go and surveil places and things and interview people to find out if there are, if the asset was here, if it wasn't, that sort of thing. I had an example, a case where a gentleman was hiding his sailboat, and there's a tool where you can actually track boats and their locations because they are registered with the state. I found the marina where this boat was last seen, looked through the whole marina. The boat was not there, but I did speak to a new employee of the marina who didn't know enough not to talk to me. And she actually said, yeah, that boat was here like this morning, and I think they, came and took it. So the PI stuff starts to kick in, and you just try to track things down, and hope that you find it.
Well, I'm sure one day you'll write a book about all these. They may seem mundane, but heck,
yes,
they make movies out of less. So one of the things I noticed, you've got a talk coming up that you've set up with the Conroe, Lake Conroe Chamber of Commerce. Tell us a little bit about that in the time we have remaining.
Yes, so I haven't scheduled it as yet, but it'll be, it's geared towards small business owners in the community, and it's just it's about educating them on fraud and why they need fraud risk assessments for their business. Give them some statistics, as we talked about at the beginning here of how bad fraud is in small businesses, and give them some tools on how to protect their businesses, resources, and just let them know that I'm here to help them try to protect their business from fraud, losing their hard-earned assets. So.
Well, that's a conversation I would encourage every business person within a radius of 50 miles or whatever is convenient, or a member of the chamber, obviously. And I encourage you, please let us know here at the Weekly Business Hour when you have it, and we'll put it up on our social media. So to broaden the advertising and marketing of that program. Well, Lisa, I can't thank you enough for taking time to visit with us. You work in a very interesting, intriguing world where, as we well know, books, movies, all kinds of situations have been explored. And but one that I think is very critical to the operation of any business, small business, on a day-to-day basis, is to utilize services that you offer, particularly when you go to hire and otherwise a red flag comes up that something's amiss in your financial processes. So if people want to get in touch with you with a question, or perhaps to engage your services, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, the number of different ways. They can go to my website, www.dragoninvestigation.com. They can give me a call. My phone number is 281-670-8334, or they can email me, info@dragoninvestigation.com. And just give me a call, email me, whatever. We'll talk about what your need is, and we can go from there.
Well, again, thank you so much for being our guest, and again, sharing your business and what you do. In my opinion, a real asset to our community, to our business community.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me.
OneBestConsult.com, a community of small business owners where you as an owner can find answers to the most pressing business questions you have. Not sure who to turn to when you have a challenge in your business? Turn to the folks at OneBestConsult.com. That's the number one, bestconsult.com, where you can always find advice you can use based on common sense business experience. Join our community of like-minded business owners at OneBestConsult.com.